My association with Africa began when I was 15 years old. My father was, at the time, a professor of law, and he took a sabbatical. He took his family to Accra, Ghana, where momentous events were happening. The Ghanaian people had just recently overthrown Nkrumah, had written a new constitution, and my father went to teach the new constitution to the students at the University of Accra. I have so many memories of that time. Of course, when you're 15 years old, it's an impressionable time. And I remember the students who would come to our home for dinner at night, and the intensity and the passion with which they talked about the future of their nation, with which they engaged in long conversations with my father about the power of their new constitution. And I remember as well some pretty fun parties. My parents were normally quite strict, but they did allow my sister and I to attend a few campus parties escorted by some of those students. I remember a little boy, and I'm embarrassed to say that I cannot remember his name, but I remember this little boy because he would walk past our home. We lived on the campus of the University of Accra at Legon, and we had sort of a little back porch, and he would walk past through our yard, past the porch, every afternoon, I presumed on his way from school back home to his village, which was nearby. He walked through barefoot, and he was about 10, I was 15. We'd look at each other every day, and after several months of this, he had the courage to come up to the porch, and we began a conversation. And from that point on, he would come maybe 2 or 3 afternoons a week, and he taught me the wonderful board game of Owari, and we would play Owari every afternoon. I think about him to this day because he was bright and strategic in the way he played the game. He beat me virtually every time. And so interesting to talk to. And I wonder still whatever became of him, because he had so much potential for leadership for his great country. And I remember the women. The women. They were my first introduction in so many ways to entrepreneurs. I didn't know to call them entrepreneurs then, but I remember noticing the women in particular, their beautiful clothes, their colorful headdresses. And what I noticed mostly was they seemed to be able to do it all. They would balance goods on their head on the way to market, they would carry their babies on their back, and they would sit in those markets and cut incredible business deals. Some of you are way too young to remember, but there are enough people in this room who remember this crazy ad that used to play on television here in the United States. I can bring on the bacon, fry it up in a pan, and never let you forget you're a man. You know, remember that one? These women had it, baby. That was exactly what these women were, and they made a huge impression on me. Eventually, I did get a degree from Stanford. Now, my degree, unlike Fred's, who got an MBA, or others, mine was in medieval history and philosophy. That's probably why I started my career as a secretary. But eventually, I made it through my secretarial experience, which happened just about 2 miles from here in a little startup company, and got an MBA and went off to AT&T and Lucent Technologies, and then came back here to California to lead Hewlett-Packard. And as was mentioned in the introduction, I've also dabbled in politics recently. Every single one of the experiences I've had, from my own life to managing literally hundreds of thousands of people, have taught me that leaders are made, not born. Leaders are made, not born. Everyone has the potential to lead. And I should quickly say that leadership for me is not about It's not about position. It's not about title. It's not about how big your budget is. It's not about how many people report to you. In fact, I think we can agree that there are leaders in positions of either business responsibility or political power who actually don't lead at all. And then there are people who are scattered throughout communities and organizations who lead every day. Leadership is about making a positive difference. But if anyone can lead, it is also true that everyone has to learn how to lead, has to have the experiences, the tools, the education, the perspective, and in some cases the expectation that leadership is possible and that leadership is expected of them. In other words, leadership can and must be taught. And when people lead from wherever they are in their lives, from wherever they are in their communities, from wherever they are in their companies, good things happen. Now, I don't mean to sound, starry-eyed or dewy about this, but the truth is that leadership, while it is difficult to quantify, makes the difference between a positive business case and a business case that doesn't turn out. It's why we invested so heavily in leadership training at Hewlett-Packard. It is why every business deal I have ever worked on, whether it was the creation of joint ventures way back in the late 80s in places like Korea and Italy and China, whether it was investments I have made in startup companies over the last decade, or whether it was tackling something incredibly complex like the merger with Compaq Computer, when I was all done with each of those business cases, when I looked at all the numbers and all the risks and all the factors, then the evaluation that I and others had to make was, can people lead? Can people actually accomplish what's on the piece of paper? And without leadership capability, the business case will not come to fruition. I returned to Africa in 2002 as the CEO of Hewlett-Packard. And at that time, we had, as I mentioned, acquired Compaq Computer, and with that acquisition came a large organization in South Africa. I went to visit our employees and our new organization, and I must tell you that I was overwhelmed by their commitment, by their enthusiasm, by what they were doing on behalf of their customers and their communities. Now, when I had the privilege to lead Hewlett-Packard, we operated in 156 countries around the world. We had 180,000+ people. I had been to lots of organizations in lots of different countries. So I had some basis upon which to make a comparison. And I will tell you that the employees in our South African organization were as fine as any group of employees we had anywhere around the world. And they had to overcome huge obstacles. The obstacle of neglect, the obstacle of the rest of the organization not really understanding why they were there or what they were doing. I must tell you, it is also my experience that people who have had to overcome obstacles make better leaders than people for whom things have come a bit too easily, perhaps. And that was certainly true of the employees I found in South Africa. Now, they were doing fantastic work on behalf of their customers and our shareholders, but they were also doing fantastic work in the community. We had a program called World E-Inclusion, and I must just let you know for a moment that the Hewlett-Packard leader who truly led that program is sitting right here in the front row, Deborah Dunn. She was a fantastic leader for Hewlett-Packard and now does a great deal of work around social entrepreneurship, and it is actually through Deborah Dunn that I first met Fred and Chris, a story I will get to in just a moment. In any event, our employees had embraced this program. World E-Inclusion was an opportunity for employees to make long-term investments in their communities. Our goal was to do well and to do good. And they were engaged in a 3-year project to build a community center with job opportunities in one of the very poorest provinces in South Africa, the province of Limpopo. Now, it was also during this time that I began to work with President Thabo Mbeki. He had asked me to join an advisory council that he had put together. It included himself and all of his cabinet officials, and they made a quite extraordinary 3-day commitment once a year to this advisory council. And the purpose of the council, and we came from around the continent, around Europe, and I was there from the United States. The purpose of the advisory council was to talk with him and his cabinet about the opportunities for technology to transform their government and their nation. But of course, as you can imagine, over a 3-day period, we talked about all kinds of things, so many opportunities and challenges that they faced. And what I saw in those meetings, among many things, I saw people who had great heart for the challenges they faced, who had, in some cases, in all cases, huge capability. But in some cases, with some of these cabinet officials, they frankly lacked the basic tools of leadership. They knew what they wanted to do, but they didn't have the experience or the teaching to understand what it was to get it done through other people, which is the essence of leadership. The essence of leadership is to get something done through other people and to make a positive difference. It isn't that they didn't know what they wanted to do, it's that they didn't always know how to get it done. Every time I travel to Africa, whether it is for business or pleasure, I am overwhelmed by what I see. Overwhelmed by the beauty, yes. Overwhelmed by the wildlife, of course. But mostly I am overwhelmed by the people that I meet along the way. I will give you another example of my belief in the leadership potential of this great continent. And any place, any organization, any community, any country with leadership potential has the potential for great opportunity and the realization of great opportunity. I also have served as a board member of the Initiative for Global Development, as was mentioned in my bio. And as vice chair of that it is an organization of business people who believe deeply that the best way to lift countries out of poverty is through investment, is through trade, and is through the development of mutual opportunity. And as vice chair of that organization, we founded something called the Frontier 100. It started as an idea that maybe one of the places where we could add value was to connect CEOs, African CEOs, to investors and CEOs in the United States. We weren't quite sure what we were going to get when we first cast our net looking for 100 bright CEOs. We were overwhelmed by the quality of the leaders who came forward. And that group is extremely actively engaged now, not only in forging bridges and building investment opportunities for their colleagues outside of the continent, but also continuing to work together as CEOs to help mentor each other. Every one of those CEOs is world class and would compete with any CEO in this country.